Hello everyone, my name is Kitetsu and welcome to my channel. So I'm going to start something new here. Something my subscribers won't know about me, probably, is that I've always been a huge fan of Warhammer. So I want to make videos on topics I enjoy. I love games, I love Age of Sigmar, so it really makes perfect sense for me to periodically make videos on news and updates from AOS. Particularly Age of Sigmar over 40k. I do love both of them, really, but it's Age of Sigmar that kind of captivates me a little bit more. But anyway, as a fan of Age of Sigmar and Sylvaneth, I thought I could make this video to basically share some of my thoughts on what I believe is almost certainly the match play points for the Sylvaneth units. I also have some suggestions or advice on list building. You know, I've been collecting Sylvaneth for a while now, so I do have quite a bit of experience creating Sylvaneth lists from the previous General's Handbook, and it's kind of been quite straightforward to, you know, transfer my list from the old kind of format into the new one. That's been quite easy. So hopefully there's going to be something to take away from this video. You know, I'm not an ultra competitive player, nor am I the most knowledgeable on the units or all the maths hammer, but nevertheless I know enough that perhaps, shall we say, like the intermediate fan. I'm also going to say, like at the beginning, this video is going to ignore taking allies. Maybe I'll make like a separate video on that, because I didn't really give it too much thought at first, not with Sylvaneth. Like, I've been thinking about it a lot with my Skaven list, but for Sylvaneth it's kind of come to my attention that some of the Wanderer units, especially like the Eternal Guard, look insanely good, and perhaps a little bit worryingly good, because they can almost intrude on, or maybe undermine, your own kind of units a little bit in Sylvaneth. But maybe I'll make a separate video on that, because it's very interesting stuff either way. I'm also not really going to look at War Scroll battalions too much. I'll like touch on it a little bit, but personally I like 1,000 point army lists. So at this kind of points level, there's like one option that I would consider taking, but it's not really a massive thing. Right, so what have we got in front of us? As I'm recording this, we're literally like one day away from the new General's Handbook 2017 being released here in the UK, which is obviously very exciting, and I'm sure this book is going to shake things up a massive amount. I'm going to be picking up my copy of the book tomorrow morning at my local store, but I will also include a link in the description for you guys to be able to order your own copies online should you wish. I really do urge you to actually go out and buy your own copy of this book on Saturday, or whenever it comes out actually for you, because I assume it releases in all territories at the same time. I have no idea. But basically, if the last book is anything to go by, I can guarantee that this is going to be so much more than just a list of points. It really, like last time, it really was your essential handbook at the heart of this game. It's got every possible option to play the game in the way that you want. You know, if you're all about the narrative and you like making up these storylines for your epic battles, it's there, you can do it. If you want to just pick your favourite models, you want to ignore more or less all of the rules of what can go with what, you just want to go, hey, this guy looks cool, so does him, I'm going to put them together, you can do it. It's all in there. And if you're, you know, more about balancing these games, that's there too for a more kind of competitive play. So that being said, you know, as much as I'm urging you to go out and buy the book, I still think a video like this has its place, because it allows us to discuss our opinions, give our views on the changes, maybe give advice on how to field an army like this. And obviously this video is going to suit my way of playing, not necessarily your way of playing. So, you know, bear in mind that my lists look great to me, but they may look horrible to you. So, with the release date so soon, along came the rather large amount of leaks. As I've mentioned, this list I'm pretty much positive it's correct. We don't know for certain until tomorrow morning, but to be honest, in my mind there is no actual doubt that this is the real list, and I can obviously slightly update this video tomorrow morning just to check that this is all as it should be, but I'm going to say this is the list, so let's roll with that. So what we're looking at, the table in front of you pretty much has everything you need to know. If all you want is the new points values for SYLVANETH, look no further, it's here. Take that away and you're done. But I want to actually review these changes, look at their implications, and basically speaking, everything with a green arrow next to it on the left has had a change of points or some kind of change or amendment to it, which as you can see is every single unit apart from Dryker, the Spirit of Derthu and the Tree Lord Ancient. Anything new has been coloured in green font, so you've basically got the points changes and you've got a battle line change as well. And just for comparison's sake, in brackets I've also put in red the previous points in the last General's Handbook, so we can start to look at these implications. Quick note on abbreviations, BL stands for Battle Line, BH Behemoth, L.BH over there is the leader Behemoth, and SYL, if it wasn't obvious, is SYLVANETH. So the good news is that aside from our 3 unchanged units, everything has decreased in points aside from Kurnoth Hunters. To be honest with you, I'm actually exceedingly happy with all these changes. If I had been given the task of writing this list myself, it's more or less exactly what I would have come up with. I think there have been some glaring balancing issues with SYLVANETH, which we'll get onto in more details in a moment, but essentially, yeah, we're just going to be going over these points changes, and obviously this battle line change, which I'm actually quite excited about. And obviously you have to note that for the Spite Revenants and Tree Revenants, you do have to have the SYLVANETH allegiance for them to count as battle line, but again, we'll get onto that in a little bit. And it's funny actually, because Spite Revenants were a personal pet peeve for me in the past because I really wanted them as a battle line unit, but more detail in a minute. So let's start off by looking at these 3 units that haven't changed. Of everything in the list, these are probably the exact 3 that I wouldn't have changed. You know, at this moment in time, I'm pretty happy with these units. I'm sure imminent changes could be on the horizon, with a new SYLVANETH battle tome sure to emerge sometime soon. But these are some good, well-rounded units that have an appropriate points cost, in my opinion. All 3 of these are actually some of my favourite units, and I think they're well worth their respective 400, 280 and 300 points. You know, when you put them in the right list, and I guess that's what everything boils down to, because potentially every unit can be good if you use it in the right list, or at least that's supposed to be the idea of this whole thing. I love the Spirit of Derthu. He's like the SYLVANETH beatstick behemoth that can more or less hold its own against any other unit in the game. Then you've got that Ancient. It's a solid support unit that can equally hold its own. Very useful in certain battalions. And, you know, both of these models can make excellent generals because you can obviously give them command traits, unlike Dryker. But then Dryker is like a personal favourite character of mine, especially as a long-time Wood Elf collector. I still have the literally like ancient metal version of her, which I think they now use as the branch Wraith model. But the fact this character was reborn was literally one of the reasons I embraced Age of Sigmar in the first place. I kind of can't believe they even did decide to update her with a new model and bring her back with an excellent continuation of her lore. But more importantly in the game, she's an absolute beast for her points cost, and she is literally a horde shredder. But she's exceedingly kind of good at crowd control against low cost infantry with a large model count, but she's kind of less good in other roles. She's certainly got a really kind of important place in the game, and I'd say she's just a fun unit to take, and I'd kind of look at Durthu or the Spirit of Durthu in the same way. They're fun units. Right, so I've just spent more than enough time talking about the units that haven't changed. Let's look at what has changed, starting with the battle line. So assuming these points are real, they're more or less perfect. Dryads, in my opinion, were the best battle line unit for Sylvaneth, and they're now even cheaper. Like, great. And they've got a massive regiment discount. That's always nice, especially when Dryads get quite good buffs for being in large units, so that's brilliant. They've dropped kind of 20 points to 100 points, and I think that's about right. You know, it's easy to underestimate a unit of Dryads at first glance, but when you have a unit of, say, 20 of them in a Wildwood, they become pretty intimidating. That being said, I think the points cost holds up well, as they are quite situational. It is quite easy to put them in their advantageous situation, but at the same time they could potentially be less consistent than, say, a basic Stormcast Liberator. You know, at 100 points for 10, they now stack up very comparably to a unit of Liberators at the same cost, in my opinion. You know, I think maybe that 20 points was a little bit overcost. Whereas, I guess, like for like, there's now 2 Dryads per 1 Liberator, assuming Liberators haven't really changed, which I highly doubt they have. I don't really know why I'm using a Liberator as a point of comparison, but it always kind of makes sense in my head. And if you think Liberators, I think, have 2 wounds, you'd basically get your 2 wounds here. You'd get more attacks, but interesting. I'll have to think a little bit more about it, but I think that is a pretty balanced points cost for them. Now, I don't have too much to say about the other 2 battle line units, other than that I'm a fan of them both. They were previously too expensive, so the decrease in points is, you know, essential in my opinion. Tree Revenants in particular, what can we say about those? I think they kind of had an excellent role on the board because of their abilities, especially in like mobility, but they were also a bit of a glass cannon. They died exceptionally easily. They did previously have the advantage of being the cheapest battle line units, but now, luckily, thank goodness, that honour is shared with the Spite Revenants, which are now also battle line with Sylvaneth allegiance even. This kind of really bothered me before, that Spite Revenants weren't battle line for Sylvaneth. Like, it did not make any sense at all. So it was one of the big things I was hoping they would change, and I kind of didn't think they would, but I'm kind of really glad they have. You know, if you compare them on their war scrolls, if you look at their points, they were the same. So why were the Tree Revenants battle line and not the Spite Revenants, especially if you have Dryker in your army? You know, I thought the perfect solution was that they would add in the notes something like, if you take Dryker as your general or something like that, if she's included in your army, then they would count as battle line. But now it's even better. They're literally just battle line in a straight Sylvaneth army anyway, so can't go wrong there. What else have we got to say? I think, in all honesty, now that they have decreased these units in cost, I think we're going to hopefully see them a little bit more in play. I actually have a box, believe it or not, of Spite Revenants and Tree Revenants, which I've never made up. And I was kind of torn by the fact that Tree Revenants were battle line, but I wanted to build the Spite Revenants because I like Dryker. And they really do have this great synergy with Dryker that I definitely want to use. And it's funny because even when I bought the box in the store, the guy in the Games Workshop, he said, "Why are you buying tree revenants? They're not very good." And while I don't agree with him that they're not good, because obviously they do have some good objective capturing roles, I must admit, as a general basic staple battle line unit, you are better off with dryads. And obviously this balance points adjustment kind of reflects that balance change. Right, let's move on to the big ones. We knew this was coming, right? The number of people screaming at Games Workshop to fix this unit, to stop the Kurnoth Hunter spam. So, for what they were, these units were ridiculously cheap, and every competitive Sylvaneth army took as many of them as they could. But now they are 40 points more expensive. Will this fix them? Yes and no. I would say mostly yes, to be honest. I think this 40 points is going to make quite a big difference. I mean, time is going to tell. It's still quite easy to field them in potentially large numbers, but you have a penalty for doing so. You know, it's forcing you to compromise with your list in a way that I think is really going to make you think about their value and the role in the army. I personally still love the unit. I will still be using them. I'm definitely pleased they're more expensive though, and I'll kind of show you some of my ideas in a minute of you know, what I would do with these units in my own lists. And for me personally, it doesn't actually affect my lists too much that they are more expensive, but yeah, more on that I guess in a little bit. Let's have a look at this group I'm calling the 20-point decrease group, which is, when you think about it, probably not the best name for the group, because I think all of these have been decreased by 20 points as well, but never mind, they're not battle line, so that's what I've grouped them as. So I guess these are not units I use too much, especially not at 1,000 points, with the exception of the Branch Witch. So again, I probably won't say too much. I think the Branch, Wraith and Witch especially needed to be reduced in cost. Like the Tree Revenants, they were glass cannons. Exceptionally useful, but so easy to destroy if you aren't careful with them. As for the other two, I'm not going to use Alariel. She's excellent, but she's so expensive, and in all of the battle reports I've seen, she's just died so quickly, and she's got these really great healing abilities, but I guess she's more of a support character. But you know, the second you put something huge on the table, it's an immediate bullseye for everything to just destroy. So, you know, in a 1,000-point list, if you're putting 600 points into her, when that's gone, you've lost 60% of your army. Just bam, gone. So personally, not for me, but I love the model. Who doesn't? Tree Lords, again, I've never had too much incentive to use one, which I guess explains their points reduction. Maybe they're trying to encourage people to put these on the table more, and I guess they suffer from the same issue of being quite easy to take down. Personally, I tend to focus more on like Ancients and Spirits of Durthu. What with me only using like 1,000-point lists, you know, I don't think I'd take too many behemoths, but I guess if I was taking a larger army, I would very definitely be including more of these. Good model, just not one I use very much. So finally, let's have like a little kind of look at the list that I use, my favourite lists, and kind of how these lists will be affected by the new points changes. So this here is my old 1,000 point Sylvaneth list that I created, and apologies if I make any errors with the maths, it's never been my strong point, but hopefully it's okay. Basically, I would field an Ancient and a Witch, or I would take Dryker and the Spite Revenants. So usually one or the other combination, probably depending on what I was up against. Now, in addition to that, I would take 2 units of Kurnoth Hunters. Doesn't really matter what they're armed with, to be honest, anything. And I would probably take the 2 units of Dryads as my staple battle line. I've already kind of gone over the fact I think they're the best. And I also have another version of this list which takes kind of advantage of the Gnarlroot Battalion, but even then it felt a little bit excessive on the magic. So this would be my preferred list, and let's have a look at how the new General's Handbook is going to affect this list and the points balance. Because kind of potentially the changes are potentially very little against some opponents and probably a lot against others, I guess. But let's have a look. This is how it would change, okay? So you're saving 20 points on each of the Dryad units, 20 points on the Spite Revenants or Witch, depending on which you took, which means you've saved 60 points. Now, you've increased 80 points by the 2 lots of 40 from the Kurnoth Hunters. So really, the points reductions are covering the cost of a whole unit and a half of Kurnoth Hunters. But you have like a 20 point deficit. And that 20 points, if you look at the previous army, if I'd taken Dryka, you would end up with a 980 point army. Because you've got a 20 point deficit, you are now at 1000 points with Dryka. So basically it locks you out from taking an Ancient, which for me personally, I would prefer to take Dryka anyway, so it's not the biggest issue. Like, I love Ancients and they're fun, but I guess it's like the more common list that we see. I like being different. So, yeah, I think, you know, I'm happy with this list. I think this is fine. It suits my preference. It's what I would do anyway. Obviously, if you tried to put the Ancient in, you would go over by 20 points. So, I guess, you know, this list does suit my playstyle though. So if you wanted to mix things around, you could swap Dryka for the Ancient, and you could potentially swap out one of the Dryad units for a, you know, Tree Revenant, or, you know, I think you go Tree Revenants if you weren't having Dryka. So, you know, there's ways around it. It's quite easy, but then you have quite a fragile battle line. So this is the way I would do it. Now, as you can see in this list, it doesn't really affect things too much. I mean, it does, especially if you want to use your Ancient, but not too much. But bigger changes can happen, as we'll see in a minute. So, Battalion Changes, as I said, I'm not going to go into it too much. At 1000 points, the only one I would really occasionally take is Household Battalion and the Gnarlroot Wargrove. Now, previously, you were looking at 20 points and 80 points for each of those, for a total of 100, which was insanely cheap, really, for what it was. In the new General's Handbook, ouch, you've got literally is that 150% increase in the cost of this? So you've literally gone up 150 points. Household is now 70 points, the Gnarlroot Wargrove is now 180 points. And I don't really know quite why they've increased all of these battalions so much. It's obviously a big balancing issue that they're addressing. I haven't seen the effects of battalions too much in a negative way, apart from some of the ones which we won't mention here, which have been abused and spammed to death. I guess that's what they're exactly trying to address, is across the board just stopping this 40k detachment issue running rampant in Age of Sigmar, because that really did kill 40k. Now, if I was going to use these battalions previously, this is the list I would have come up with. I would have had my household through the Ancient, the Branch Witch, and a unit of Tree Revenants, which I think was compulsory. And I would of course take my Dryads and a unit of Kurnoth Hunters, and because of the way those points balance out there, I would have no choice but to have to take an extra Tree Revenants units. I would prefer to have had the extra Dryads, but the 20 points would have prevented me from doing that. But when we look at that with the new battalion costs, you literally would have to take out your unit of Dryads, which is really not a good thing at all, and even then you would still be 10 points too expensive over the 1,000 point threshold if you were looking at a 1,000 point army. So you've completely more or less ruined that style of army list. Can you fix it? I think you can, but you would end up with basically having to remove your Kurnoth Hunters, which I guess that's probably what they were going for anyway, but it does significantly alter the strength of that list. And I mean, I said at the beginning I probably wouldn't use that combination too much anyway, but interesting to note. So let's look at the last sort of thing that I want to talk about, which is the kind of bringing Durthu to the table at a 1,000 point list. And you know, I love this list because it's got Durthu, it's got Hunters, it's got Dryads, it's fun. That's basically what it is, because I always enjoy having Durthu on the table. It's not necessarily very competitive, but nonetheless it's fun. And we see the increase of Hunters, the increased cost of Hunters coming into play really nicely here. We are basically forced to take away a unit of Kurnoth Hunters here. I mean, one alternative you can do is swap both units of Dryads for 2 units of Tree Revenants, but that's not a list I would like to take here. I think, you know, Durthu himself, if you're not keeping him topped off, he becomes weak very quickly. And if you've got such a weak battle line, I just think you're not going to be very competitive. But, you know, if that's your thing, I guess you can try that. But what you're really being forced to do with this list of mine is I would have to take away a unit of Hunters, and then I would adjust it by basically adding in an extra unit of Dryads. So you could, you know, merge those two together to have a unit of 20 and take advantage of some of their larger unit benefits. And then you would literally have 80 points free, which, you know, you could spend on a Branch Witch or Spite Revenants. If it was me, I would take the Branch Witch here, because then you can keep Durthu topped off. And to be honest, this is actually quite a nice list, I think, because you've got your Durthu, you can heal him, you've got some Hunters, and you've got a very solid battle line. But yeah, that's pretty much it really for this video. You know, I know it's like a whistle-stop tour of, you know, some of the changes and how that would affect my personal lists, and I obviously haven't really gone into the battalions very much, or the war groves, but in terms of the lists I would create, you know, trying to be a bit more fun with them, you know, I think these changes they're very good. I'm really happy with them. I'm kind of glad that it hasn't really stopped me taking the list that I want to take. You know, that's always a worry, that especially people who rely on spams of units, you know, the second they address that, the army you love taking is no longer viable. And I guess because I'm not too interested in doing the whole spam thing, that hasn't affected me too badly. So that's really good. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me, I guess. If you do have any questions at all, leave them down below. I will be answering every single one of them. And I do hope this was interesting or useful in some way. You know, like I said, I may make a second video where I'm looking at some of the ally options, because, you Like I said, the Eternal Guard are insanely good. It's scary. I almost think, you know, looking at my preferred 1,000-point list, I think you're just going to get to the point where you would have to start including a unit of them. But they also have their disadvantages, but I guess that's another video, so we can look at that at another point. But, you know, if you did like this video, please do like and subscribe to make my day, and I will see you guys soon in the next video.